My name is Joe Baez. My pronouns are he, him, his, and she, her, hers. I'm 26 years old, and I am a fourth year PhD student in the Department of American Studies at the George Washington University.
What are your personal goals for the fellowship?
My personal goals as a pedagogy fellow are to just acquire new skills and acquire new skills that I'm not necessarily focusing on in my graduate degree. In my graduate degree, I'm having a lot of experience like in the classroom with undergraduate students and of course reading and writing. But I think that I don't have any spaces that are specifically focused on pedagogy, how to communicate information to people who might not be in the spaces you're in, like in a graduate seminar space or in a university classroom. And so I believe like the fellowship is expanding that, and also getting me used to like more front facing, public facing kinds of education, um, compared to like graduate papers and guest lectures and things like that.
So, would you say your goals for the fellowship kind of align for your own personal future?
Absolutely. I want to get a PhD, and I'm getting a PhD because I want to be a professor. But it's not just about the title per se, it's about impacting students the ways that I was impacted as an undergraduate. And I also think that that work can be done outside of higher education as well. And so actually when I applied to grad school, I my goals were to of course get a doctorate, but also to be like a public intellectual and contribute to outside like conversations that are happening more publicly, and also contributing with mediums like think pieces and audio content as well.
That's cool. I like that. Okay. Is there any information about your area of interest or research that you wouldn't normally bring up but piques your interest? There could be like a little fun fact that you thought about, but no one's like asked you about it, but you kind of like have it in the back.
Huh. Yeah, I think that so for my research interest, for example, my research examines queer and trans of color fat aesthetics. And so by that I mean I look at how queer and trans fat women and femmes of color represent themselves in arts and media. And what people don't know unless you're like a close friend is that the work is like deeply personal and autobiographical. I mean, a lot of our work is always autobiographical, but the people that I write about, first of all, have impacted my life tremendously. Like, the people I write about are people that I'm fans of, so like there's a deep connection there. But also, um, the people I'm writing about also help me with my own identity. I like within the last years, I started identifying as trans femme, and it was because the people that I look at and write about who helped me with my relationship to my gender and my gender identity and my femininity. So while it is a project that is about queerness and race and fatness, it's also like a love letter and like an ode to these people who I was growing up with in college, and really moved by their work. So that doesn't always get into the work itself, but it's deeply personal for me.
Okay, so what do you think about the term fat as it is now versus like the early 2000s?
Oh my god, I love this question. I love this question. The word has always had a reclamation to it. Often like people, I think if you're not in fat activist circles, you're going to think that fat is a really bad word, but the word fat has been reclaimed since the 70s and the 60s. Um but the thing about how it operates in public culture is that I think that fat is now publicly becoming reclaimed. Like there are a lot of artists and public figures who are being fat positive or body positive. And so I think in the early 2000s, I think fat was completely stigmatized. Like when people thought about fat, it was like deeply about medicine, like the word obese was often connected to the word fat. And now I think that we're in a moment where fat people and the word fat is now a symbol of pride for those people, but also it could be something that is like desired or appropriated. Like I think about people that go for the word thick, or go for bodies that are thick, or like hourglass, if that makes sense. But I think now, I think we're completely moving away from fat as like obese and unhealthy, to fat as like a thing that you can take pride in. But it depends on who you talk to. But like I there's more of us that are prideful now than there were in the early 2000s.
Are stigmas of against fat women and femmes of color different from other fat people?
Absolutely. Well, I do think that everybody who is fat experiences fat phobia. I think that the ways in which fat people of color and fat women and fat femmes experience it is more distinct than for fat white men. Like, I think that fat white men, while they do experience fat phobia, are not denied like spaces of power. And like, if we think about how fat, like when there is a space for fat white men in like the white supremacist capitalist state. Like when there are political cartoons of fat white men, fatness there is considered negative, but fat white men are able to still wield power in this country. Whereas I think that for fat women of color, for fat people of color, fat women and fat femmes, I think that their fatness um traps them in how they get represented. Like for example, Patricia Hill Collins writes about how fat black women who were enslaved were considered like mammies. And then that in turn creates like a trope for of fat black women where they're conceived as caregivers, asexual and aromantic beings who are only meant to nurture other people. And I feel like for many fat people of color and fat women and fat femmes, like they are denied certain things. Like fat women and fat femmes are always considered either desexualized or hypersexualized. So I think it's really complicated. I think that the lack of whiteness and the lack of cis manhood like makes fatness and racism and misogyny and transphobia compound in very like constricting ways for people.
So it's like, are you saying it's also kind of like historical that this has been happening?
Absolutely, it's definitely historical. The notion that like fat black women are treated and regarded as motherly is a historical phenomenon that dates back to the transatlantic slave trade. And you can also see for like fat indigenous women, fat Pacific Islander women as well, like there are tropes there. And also like the idea that fatness and womanhood are connected and also deemed are problematized um goes back for centuries. Like there's an awesome book called Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings, where she historicizes fatness and anti-blackness and misogyny as global historical projects that are not just American products.
I want to go more in detail what you actually do at the fellowship.
Yeah.
So could you give me a little brief scenario of what exactly the process is during the fellowship?
So the fellowship has been a lot, like on one hand it's been kind of like hands off. Like we've had weeks where we can just work independently, which has been very helpful. And so the meetings are either like one third we don't meet for independent working time, another third is very practical experiences, like with Ronald, who where it helps us out with our technology and recording process, or we talked to last year's fellows and got experience with them there. So a third of our meetings have been like that, and then a third of them have just been either community building or helping us just develop as like thinkers and people creating these projects. Like last week we had a guest speaker come and walk us through like a workshop of kind of getting back in touch with our bodies. And so that's like those are the meetings. And then on our own end, it's been like a lot of like overthinking, um a lot of just like brainstorming and figuring out like what do we want this project to be. So the days that if it wasn't Wednesday, I was like thinking, okay, like what do I want project to be? I revised my script for my first project like 3 times in the process. And so I think it's been a lot of thinking and overthinking in terms of the independent work.
So your projects, what was your topic for the first one?
So my first topic for the project was all over the place. Like
Mm.
I wanted to do an intro to fat studies. And on paper, I thought it was very feasible. And then talking to Caitlin and the rest of the fellows, I had a sense I was doing too much. Like I was gonna do like what is fat phobia? What is fat studies? What is the fat liberation movement? Like all these things at once. And for 10 minutes, that's a lot. So after I got feedback that it was too much, I downsized and I was gonna do a project on how fatness is considered unhealthy. Like, how is it considered like a medical problem in the world? And that was more focused, but it didn't feel like it was me. It felt very detached. It felt very like textbooky. And so what I landed on was this project. So for context, in undergrad, my research looked at fat phobia, racism, and misogyny on LGBTQ plus dating apps. So I was looking at a culture called no fats, no femmes culture, where people on dating apps would post the words no fats, no femmes plainly. And so that for my thesis, I wrote this poem called 20 Times I Was Told My Body Was Not Good Enough. And it's a list of 20 moments in my life where I was treated poorly because of my body. And it was from a range of people, like my parents, former partners, friends, and strangers on the street or online. And I begin with that poem to show that my research comes from a really personal place. And I'm learning about dating apps to figure out why I was treated the way I was. That happened in undergrad. And I realized for this project, I think it'd be really helpful because it's really like, the experiences are really plain and really relatable. So what I did is I'm taking the poem and I'm reciting it. But between like every 2 or 3 moments, I'm giving a teaching moment. Like, so after the first 2 moments, I define fat phobia. And I say fat phobia is a system of oppression where people are discriminated based on the size and shape of their bodies. And so after every 1 or 2 moments, you get a teaching moment of like, hey, what you should learn from these 2 experiences is that fat phobia is this, fat phobia is also this, and fat phobia is that. And so it's a poem with like annotations in it, if that makes sense. And that's the first project. And then my second project is also an ode to my thesis. Because in my undergraduate thesis, I interviewed 8 people who identify as queer, fat people of color. And I interviewed them about their experiences on dating apps. And so for my for project 2 this summer, I asked most of them to have a conversation with me. And so I would take their answers and kind of just like stitch them together really randomly to kind of give people a sense of like, what are fat people's experiences? I want to get at like the pleasures and pains of being fat. And what I've been telling people is like, think about the miseducation of Lauryn Hill and like how the end of every song was like a kind of conversation amongst like, on the album, every song ends with a group of children talking to their teacher about love. And it's like you get to hear like these kids like ruminating about what love means to them, and it's so beautiful. And I want it to be like you're a fly on the wall hearing us talk about being fat and hearing about the good and the bad and the ugly of those experiences.
How do you imagine this changing how we love ourselves?
I think it depends on who you are and what your body looks like. I think that people whose bodies are considered undesirable have a lot more work to do with learning how to love their own bodies. I think that I think it's a there's a it's a two-way approach. I think you have to learn that your body isn't a problem, and that takes a lot of work. Like it took me years to realize that being fat um was not a death sentence, and that it does not mean that I'm ugly, and that in fact I'm beautiful because I'm fat. Like that these are things you have to learn, but it takes a lot to learn these things and to believe it. But I also think to love yourself, you need to have people that love you. Like you cannot do it by yourself. um I learned to love my body because of the friends in my life who made me feel beautiful always. And especially in high school, like I think high school is horrible for everybody. And I had friends in high school who really were like, you're so beautiful, like you are so sexy, you're so hot, like, and by them complimenting me, I started to believe it. Like if you have someone telling you you're beautiful, you're beautiful, you're beautiful, you're beautiful, you're gonna believe it. And so I I helped. A lot of it was people telling me who I was and me believing it. But that takes a lot of work, but we need people like that. But I think it begins with knowing that your body is your body, and it does not mean that you do not deserve love. Because I remember like being young and like my parents were telling me like you need to go on a diet, like that you're gonna die at the age of 20 something or whatever. And that teaches you that your body's a problem. And so you need to learn that no, your body is your body, and it will keep you alive, and it's worth cherishing. But a lot of us are taught to always work on our bodies, and I think that is the start of the problem.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you,
Like
thank
I
you.
feel like I needed that. But the people I've written about, for example, Laura Aguilar and like
Yeah.
T.S. Madison. I think the third one is Mark. I read
Mark
in
Aguhar.
yes, Mark
Mhm.
Aguilar. How have they influenced your research? And honestly, how have they influenced your person?
Mm. Um, I'll start with T.S. Madison. Um, T.S. Madison, like T.S. Madison, I think was the person who helped me realize that I am trans. And T.S. Madison, like she's like she was known on Vine back when Vine was a thing, and she's like a YouTube person. She loves YouTube. She like always does live streams on YouTube. And like T.S. Madison literally got me through like depression. Like I'm like after college I was so depressed and like not in grad school, didn't know what I want to do with my life. And I remember like every day after work I would like go get Chinese takeout and like watch C.S. Madison's YouTube channel. And listening to her talk about her life, her body, and her experiences really sustained me. And so I love her. But also I think as a fat black trans woman, she's so she's not who you consider like an ideal model activist, but she is. Like if you ever look at her stuff, she's very raunchy, really like really raw, like really raw. And she's such an advocate for so many people, but she's not going to be at the White House because like her methods of advocacy do not align with the standards that people value in this country. So I love I love the fact that she is so messy. And in some ways she's problematic. She has problematic ideals that she's uttered. But I love how complicated she is. And especially like on her body. Like her relationship to her body is so public, like the way that she carries herself and loves her, like she has had plastic surgery all over, and like she will be the first one to crack jokes at herself, but then also feel herself at the same time. Like she's so complicated, and I love her for that. Laura Aguilar, she's interesting to me because she's a I see the time. She's a no, you're right, no, you're right. She is a she was a fat Chicana lesbian woman who did photography, and she like when with my relationship to my body, I'm very like glamorous, and I'm into posing and like outfits, photo shoots. And in her photography, she's not going for glamour. She has photos of her laying on like on a desert ground, like corpse like. And so the way that she represented her body was far from beautiful. And I think we can learn a lot from how she represented herself, and that a body can just be. And so she taught me a lot there. And then Mark Agujar was a performance artist, a queer trans femme Filipina. And I think that she both like had very like tongue-in-cheek kind of content. She was on Tumblr, and so her Tumblr was like a lot of like fuck white people, like fuck muscular people, like it was in all caps, like it would just be things in all caps, like she'd be going off. And then she would just have like photo shoots on photo booths that she would post on Tumblr, and she would have videos like performance art that was always so like trolly, like it was so funny. And so I love her because I think that her social media felt like a blog, like just a genuine blog that was not meant to be like this like grand fuck you to the world. It was like her living her life on the day to day, but it's still it feels very relatable. But also she's making such important statements about the world while also eating powdered donuts on a photo booth photo on her MacBook. Like it's such an interesting dichotomy of like activism and critique and day-to-day life and pleasure. And so they all teach us such different things, which I'm so obsessed with for my dissertation, because like we're not gonna get when you look at my work, you're not gonna find like the triumphant like fat person. I mean, like T.S. Madison does give that, but you're gonna meet people who all represent the bodies that are considered ugly by the world in such different ways. And I think, if anything, like my second project for the fellowship, it's that I want people to not think of fat people as a monolith, because we all have different relationships to our bodies, but we all have different strategies of navigating them in this world.